Tonight, I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada, for a special edition of our show. I'd like to say that all these people came here just for that, but they really came for Freedom Fest, the world's biggest gathering of free minds. This year's topic, are we becoming Rome? Now, free minds, that's a phrase we libertarians like to use to describe ourselves. This is basically a big conference of libertarians, and I think our minds are unusually free, right? We had to free our minds to get these concepts, but a lot of people think we're crazy. But on to tonight's topic, Rome. Is the United States about to fall as Rome did? Here's a depiction of barbarians sacking the city. Is this our future? First, we hear from a conservative, a historian, and a libertarian. The conservative, Steve Forbes of Forbes Media. You have some libertarian leanings, but conservative, I would call you. The historian, Carl Richard, is an expert on Rome. The libertarian, Matt Kibbe of FreedomWorks, a group that fights against big government. So, Matt, you first. Are we becoming Rome?
I think we are. I think the parallels are quite ominous. The debt, the expansionist foreign policy, the arrogance of executive power taking over our country. But I do think we have a chance to stop it.
Carl?
I think there are similarities not only with the fall of the empire, which is what most people talk about when they talk about the fall of Rome, but also the fall of the Republic, which was 500 years earlier. And there I see Romans engaging in unconstitutional acts, political leaders, and so on, and I see some of that.
Unconstitutional acts like stuffing ballot boxes, corruption, what
No,
kinds?
that did happen, the sort of under-the-table corruption, and that's bad, obviously, but it doesn't bother me as much as the overt things. For instance, Marius was elected consul 6 years in a row, even though under the Roman Constitution, it was term limited to 1 year. And people just kept voting for him. They knew it was unconstitutional. So that kind of stuff.
And now we have Congress passing laws they haven't read.
Right, and we have presidents of both parties legislating by executive order, saying I'm not going to enforce certain laws because I don't like them. We have bureaucrats legislating through regulations. We have Supreme Court saying it's constitutional for the government to take your property and sell it to someone else because he can give us more tax revenue. There are a lot of examples.
Steve?
Well, yes, you can always find parallels, but the fact that we're meeting, I think, shows that the antidote is coming about. We, the people, have not gone the way, been totally corrupted the way the Romans were. We're not passive. We saw it with the Tea Parties, and despite IRS suppression, the Tea Party movement is coming back again. You're going to see it in 2014 and 2016. And they may try to feed us to the lions, but we're going to own the lions because we believe in free enterprise.
That's a happy thought. I wish I were as optimistic as you, but I fear we will become Rome. And let me just poll the audience. Are you as optimistic as Steve? How many of you think we're going down the tubes, we're in deep trouble? Most. How many of you think we're going to turn it around? They can't both be true. But again, you are not a normal audience because you're libertarians, right? I mean, wacko birds, according to Senator John McCain. That's what he called some libertarian-minded politicians. But walking around here at this conference and seeing the Tea Party booths and people selling investments in gold and game show quizzes that test your knowledge of dead Austrian economists, you have to kind of understand why we get our reputation as eccentric and wonkish and different. Is this unfair? Is this fair? No. Come on, isn't this group mostly men, mostly badly dressed men? My going to libertarian events, this is what I notice. It's people who care about numbers, less about how they look. I think Steve Forbes is a perfect example of this. He's the epitome of the wonkish geek. Is this unfair?
You're sounding like my opponents, and so I didn't expect that from you. But let's face it, people who make things happen. You could describe our forefathers, our revolutionaries, in the same way. They're always minorities who see something's wrong, go out and persuade, become agitators, and change the world. And we've done it once, and we're going to do it again. We are going to be the leader. Absolutely. And you, of all people, should know, don't look at the superficial. Look at the substance. We've got the substance. That's why we're going to ultimately win.
Well, we're going to try to show them tonight. Carl, do you have more historical perspective we should think about comparing America to Rome?
You know, the debt, the high spending. I'm talking about the late empire, the high spending,
They had high debt and high spending.
The valuation of currency. There's another one. You know that by the end of the empire, a so-called silver coin was only 2% silver. That's how they devalued it. And it got to the point that the Roman government would not accept its own currency in taxes. You had to give goods. We're not there yet.
Our taxes always tend to go up. And that was part of Rome's problem, say, two people who try to spread the word about the damage taxes do. Grover Norquist is head of Americans for Tax Reform. He's somehow persuaded many politicians to pledge to never raise taxes. Economist Steve Moore covers these issues for the Wall Street Journal. So, Grover, Rome had high tax rates?
Well, not always. At first, for about 400 years, they had no real direct internal taxes because they looted their neighbors. That may not...
We're not advocating that, right?
We got to talk to the Canadians, but that may not work out. But then, even that wasn't enough. And so they started having dramatically higher taxes. The amount of money they spent on the armies to occupy those other guys cost more, perhaps, than they were able to extract. Taxes got...
They started with tariffs.
They had tariffs. Caesar Augustus brought us the first death tax. Constantine brought us the first income tax. All the stuff that we're now living with, they were thinking up. The property taxes, so rough that people were actually abandoning their property and just say, leave me alone. And then they had to pass laws to not let you leave your property. So you had to stay there and farm it so they could loot you. Things got, towards the end, it got very, very rough, and it's part of why things didn't work.
One penalty for not paying your taxes was being sold into slavery.
Or killed, yeah.
That's the modern day IRS, right? I mean, that's what they do to us now.
When they would demand payment in gold and silver, the only way to get it was to sell, in some cases, children into slavery, oneself into slavery, to get currency. It was that bad. Yeah.
But 1%, I read, was the highest income tax. Steve,
well, what happened, I mean, Grover's exactly right. And what happened in Rome, one of the reasons Rome fell, was they kept collecting more and more money from the tributaries, the outlying areas, and it all went into Rome. And you had a massive revolt among the people all over the country who weren't in Rome. And by the way, that's happening in America today, I think. People are sick and tired of seeing their tax dollars sent to Washington and none of it coming back to the states from whence it came. And that's one of the reasons I think we should lower federal taxes and let states do this. That's one of the great things about America. We're a federalist system. The states created the federal government. The federal government did not create the states.
The reaction
right?
The reaction to the tax farmers that they had that would go out and collect the taxes.
They called them tax farmers?
Tax farmers, tax collectors. It was so bad that in one revolt in Asia Minor, they killed about 80,000 of them in a day or two.
We don't advocate killing tax collectors on this show.
It was a 4-year war that Sulla waged to put down that revolt. But it was clearly a serious tax revolt.
And John, to your point, when you asked me about the 1% tax, I don't know what those tax rates were in Rome, but when we created our federal income tax in the United States back in, I think it was around 1913, 1915, the top income tax rate when the income tax started was just 7%. Within 10 years, the top income tax rate went from 7% to 70%. You know, and it's remained high ever since. That's why I've always believed Steve Forbes had it right. We ought to go back to an 18% flat tax, get rid of all the deductions, all the loopholes, make it as simple as possible, collect the money you need, but don't create all these special interest groups. And by the way, the people who are most opposed to the flat tax, the people who are most opposed to the flat tax are people in Washington, D.C., because you take the power away from Washington.
Look, when we went into revolt 1774, 1775, Americans in the colonies were paying 2%. Our oppressors, the Brits in London, were paying 20%. It's expensive running an empire. We need to go back towards 2%. I like 2% better than 18. That's what...
2% would be it, and to be clear, we're at 40% about if you include state and local.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to get we want to get towards 2%. We functioned fairly well beyond that. And the reason the British were taxing themselves at 20% was that they were running an empire.
Is America Rome? No, thank goodness. We're not as bad in 100 ways. Our taxes are actually higher than Rome's, but we don't have slaves. And we don't kill people for sport. When we go to war, misguided or not, we don't conquer or plunder. And when we win, we usually leave. That's different. In America, poor people now live better than the emperors did. We have air conditioning, Google, painkillers, flush toilets, longer lives. Thanks to the example set by George Washington, our presidents actually leave office voluntarily. And although our current president wastes money on extravagant travel, like his recent $100 million trip to Africa, Nero was much worse. He never wore the same clothes twice. And when he traveled with 1,000 carriages. The Emperor Elagabalus, or however you pronounce his name, set up a brothel in the palace. Tiberius established an office of imperial pleasures, which gathered beautiful boys and girls from all corners of the world, so, as Tacitus put it, the emperor could defile them. Caligula is said to have made his favorite horse a senator, as depicted here.
Allow me to introduce Insultatus, a new senator of Rome. You will treat him as your peer in every debate.
Even President Obama wouldn't do that. So arrogant as our politicians are, and repugnant as many of them are, they are at least not emperors who, like Caligula, held orgies and executed the senators' wives who didn't show up. But Rome matters because empires do crumble. Rome lasted the longest of all of them. The Ottoman Empire was next. It lasted 600 years. Then the Spanish, almost that long, as did the British. We've lasted less than 300 years. We're doing better than Alexander the Great. His empire only lasted 13 years. But in our 250 years, we've accomplished amazing things, amazing prosperity. We just can't take it for granted because free and prosperous is not the natural state of things. In human history, it's rare. We now are starting to look a lot like Rome, and we ought to worry about that.